My name is Alec Blenis. I consider myself a hybrid athlete. I'm also a coach for hybrid athletes. My biggest accomplishment to date is the Murph World Record. I have the best known time in the world for that I did back in 2021. A lot of people overcomplicate cardio and they talk about heart rate, they talk about blood lactate concentration, or they talk about all these things that can be overwhelming for people who are like, I don't even have a heart rate monitor. I don't want to stare at my watch through a whole cardio session. And I think you can get a ton of results if all you think about is easy, medium, hard. Easy to me is where your breathing is relatively unimpacted. You can talk with your neighbor. If someone called you, you can pick up the phone. There's medium, which is your breathing is slightly impacted. You don't really want to talk, but you have to. Zone 4, zone 5, you can't really talk. You might be able to get out a couple phrases or just enough to tell your partner to leave you alone or something like that. 99% of the population should strive for is 60 to 90 minutes per week with a priority just for overall health, supporting recovery, etc. So when it comes to like nose breathing versus mouth breathing, just do what feels good and natural to you. There's no real advantage to forcing yourself to breathe a particular way. 40 is good. It's a good VO2 max, but in terms of improved cardiovascular health outcomes, reduced mortality, all those sorts of things, we really do want to be even above that. We want to get into the optimal or excellent range. People aren't patient. They try to do it all and it's hard. They give up. It's a lifelong pursuit. If you add cardio onto a strength training program, you're probably going to feel worse before you feel better.
Okay, so Alec, I'd love to begin this by having you sort of state some of your background and brief list of personal records. We could be here all day talking about your personal best, but just like let the listeners know what you've accomplished in the fitness world.
Yeah, for sure. I'll try to keep it brief. I never like having to talk about myself. I'm sure nobody does. But my name is Alec Blenis. I consider myself a hybrid athlete. I'm also a coach for hybrid athletes. And what that means is I like to compete and perform at a high level in both the kind of strength space and in the endurance space. I started off as an endurance athlete primarily, got into marathon running, ultra marathon running, have run like Boston, New York, a lot of the major marathons, done a lot of ultra marathons as well. And I was part of the Spartan Pro Team for a while. So I was a professional obstacle course racing athlete. But through that time in particular, I did a lot of strength training as well, because you have to be strong to do some of these obstacles and that sort of thing. And I really just fell in love with it. So starting to pursue strength at a fairly high level as well. I don't love the competition aspect of strength sports as much, but I do have like a triple body weight squat and deadlift. I'm fairly well known for my single leg strength, like single leg deadlift 315, lunge, reverse lunge 405, that kind of thing. And I like to pursue some of those sorts of goals on top of, continued competition in the ultra endurance space. My biggest accomplishment to date, I would say, is the Murph World Record. For the listeners who don't know, Murph is a famous CrossFit workout. Many people around the world all do it together on Memorial Day, so at the end of every May. And it's a 1 mile run, 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, 300 squats, and another 1 mile run, all while wearing a 20-pound weight vest. And I have the best known time in the world for that I did back in 2021. So that's a little bit about me. My favorite thing to do now is just coach other athletes who want to perform at a high level in both. So many people think that cardio kills your gains, or it's impossible to balance both because of the interference effect or time management, whatever you want to call it. But I like to show people how possible it is to do both of these things at a high level and try to make it simple, because a lot of people get kind of caught up and overwhelmed in the details of trying to make it work.
Amazing. So to give a little bit more context, can you let us know some of your best marathon, half marathons, records, so they know from a cardio perspective, you've not just completed these, but you've actually done it at pretty elite level?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So I was around 118 for the half marathon. I ran the 2013 Boston Marathon in 250. My best 50 miler was a 747 at the JFK 50 back in, I want to say that was like 2016, maybe 2015. So I'm certainly not elite, I'm not making it to the Olympic trials or anything like that. But I would say in terms of, my time commitment to it, the other things that I pursue, some of those times I was doing, a full-time student and lifting 6 days a week and that sort of thing. So I would never consider myself great at anything, but I think being able to balance it all, do everything fairly well, without necessarily dedicating my entire day and my entire life to it, living a normal life and that sort of thing too. I think it's pretty cool. And it's something I've really enjoyed.
And that segues nicely into sort of, most of the listeners here are they're not full-time athletes, but they have a full-time job. They've got kids, family. For the average person who could dedicate 5 hours a week to train, Monday to Friday for 60 minutes a day, how would you approach being, if you want to be an all-round fit, strong person, how would you like to set up your week if you only had 5 60-minute slots, speaking very broadly?
Yeah. Tough question. I mean, one big thing that's been super helpful for me, especially during some of the busier periods of my life, is trying to fit in some kind of fitness where it doesn't feel like a workout slot, but it just gets you more activity and that sort of thing to support your overall health and fitness. For example, I generally commute, to and from work on a bike, which I know isn't realistic for everybody. There's going to be, different ways that you could kind of apply this concept depending on your unique situation. But I've commuted to work on a bike. I've thrown on a weighted backpack to go for a walk with my wife in the evening. Things like that, where it's like, it's not my workout hour, it's just time I'm going to spend anyway. I'm trying to make some of that sort of stuff more fitness-like. And I've been able to stay pretty fit just doing some of those things with a couple lifts per week, even when I haven't had time to do like structured cardio. So I do think, especially if you're just looking to maintain your fitness, those sorts of things can be great. But even for building fitness, you might be surprised at what you can do, just kind of sneaking in some non-structured activity like that. But if you do say have one kind of dedicated hour per week, I like to kind of hit the extremes.
Per day, per week, yeah.
Oh yeah, 5 1 hour slots per week, 1 hour per day. If you do have that kind of setup, like a lot of people do, I prefer to hit the extremes. And by that, I mean, when you think of all of the aspects of your fitness, your strength, your speed, your endurance, I like to take a very targeted approach to each of those. So rather than try to do a little bit of everything with one workout, I like to take a very focused approach and hit on each of those qualities. So I'll have a very heavy strength workout. I'm not going to try to turn a strength workout into a cardio workout. I'm just going to go heavy, try to get as much out of that workout as I can in the gym. On the endurance side, I'll do a lot of zone 2 work. So just straight low intensity aerobic conditioning. Very easy to balance that with strength and not become too tired, or worn out from your run and you can't lift the next day because you're tired and sore. So in that sort of sense, I like to take that very focused approach. If I was just trying to be as all around fit and healthy as I could, I would probably do 2 full body lifts in the gym, probably 3 cardio sessions. And within those cardio sessions, I'd probably train a variety of intensities. I'd get the low intensity, the medium intensity, and the high intensity in each of those. I think most people would be surprised at how fit you can get with just 2 lifts per week. If the intensity is there, if you're doing, a handful of sets per muscle group in each of those sessions.
So you're saying two weight training and 3 cardio, hitting different intensities in the cardio sessions?
Yeah, that would probably be my approach. Obviously, lots of individual variation there, depending on your personal preferences. But if you were telling me you have to write a program just for the general public for 1 hour per day, that's probably how it laid out.
And talk about the different types of cardio then you'd implement into there. You said zone 2 is one of them, but what are some things you'd factor in across those 3 days?
Yeah, so I should probably explain zone 2 a little bit, but in the interest of keeping it really simple, I think a lot of people overcomplicate cardio and they talk about, zone 2 versus zone 3, zone 4 versus zone 5. They talk about heart rate, they talk about blood lactate concentration, or they talk about all these things that can be overwhelming for people who are like, I don't even have a heart rate monitor. I don't want to stare at my watch through a whole cardio session. And I think you can get a ton of results if all you think about is easy, medium, hard. To put it just slightly more in slightly more detail, if you think about your breath, easy to me is where your breathing is relatively unimpacted. So you can go about your cardio session, you're breaking a sweat, you're moving at a good pace, but your breathing is still very relaxed and comfortable. You can talk with your neighbor. If someone called you could pick up the phone, have a brief conversation. They would be none the wiser to like, oh, this guy's actually exercising on the other side of this call. So that's easy to me. And that would be your like zone 1 and 2. Then there's medium, which is your breathing is slightly impacted. You don't really want to talk, but you have to. So, your friend who's in better shape than you might be talking to you during your run and you're like answering some quick words back, but you're like, why don't you shut up? I'm kind of working hard over here. So you can talk, you're just not really in the mood to talk. Again, if someone like called you, you could pick up the phone, get a couple sentences out, but this time the person would be like, what's going on over there? Are you okay? Kind of thing. And that to me is medium intensity or moderate intensity, and what most people would call zone 3. And then zone 4, zone 5, that's where you can't really talk. You might be able to get out a couple, phrases, or just enough to tell your partner to leave you alone or something like that. Certainly not going to be picking up a phone call. You're pretty breathless. Sound like you're working hard. That's your zone 4, zone 5. That's high intensity. So if all you think about is having workouts in each of those 3 big categories, have some easy workouts, have some medium or moderate workouts, and have some hard workouts, I think most people, 99% of people, could just use those kind of 3 training zones, if you will, and have tremendous success. The advantage to easy training is you can do a lot of it. The advantage to hard training is you don't need a lot of it. And I think you get the best of both worlds when you combine some of those approaches, train a lot and train hard. And having a blend of intensities is the best way to go about doing that.
Okay, so when it comes to the person who's training five hours a week, so they've got 1 hour start a day, where does the sort of easy runs or the easy cardio fit into all of this? Because that a lot of the sort of elite athletes popularize, 80% of your training should be easy runs or low intensity, but that's not realistic for the average person. If they're spending 80% of the time, they're doing 4 out of 5 sessions easy. Is it still applicable, and how do you apply to the easy runs or the easy cardio sessions you mentioned into the 5 hour work week, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because like you said, a lot of the kind of training principles that some of this like 80-20 concepts are based off of, a lot of the zone 2 concepts are based off of, a lot of that comes from looking at the training programs of elite endurance athletes, people who are training, 10 to 14 hours a week, or running 10 to 14 times a week instead of just, 2 or 3 times. I think there's a lot that we can still take away from that, and a lot that we can learn, but there's a few things that we're going to want to tweak or adjust as well. I do think easy training is still really valuable, but 2 things to consider with it. One, that you're probably not going to do 80 to 90% of your work at a low intensity. It might be more like 60% or 50%. And really there's no exact percentage there. The key is that you're going to fill up your week with the amount of high intensity work that you can do first, because that's going to give you a bigger kind of ROI or more bang for your buck in terms of how many hours you're putting into it. But even if you are someone who's not training that much, there's still only so much high intensity work you can tolerate. Just a couple of high intensity intervals, et cetera, can be pretty tiring, and you might hit your max, so to speak, pretty quickly. And then you're going to have time left over that you can fill up with some low intensity work. So again, I wouldn't target, an 80-20 distribution or a 90-10 distribution. I would just focus on, how much high intensity work can I handle? And now how much time do I have left over for some additional easy work? And you might end up at a 60-40 split, a 50-50 split. Don't overanalyze that percentage. Just focus on getting in the workouts that are going to make you the fittest first, and kind of see where that percentage lies. The other thing with it, with zone 2 or with the easy training, is a lot of high level endurance athletes are very specific about kind of where that threshold is. So they know what their heart rate is. They know what their blood lactate concentration is. They know what their respiration rate, et cetera. They have all these kind of quantitative metrics that they can look at to know, am I in zone 2 and that sort of thing. And while the general principle of doing easy work, so to speak, is definitely important, I don't think the average novice needs to go into it with that level of detail. I always say, if you have someone who is training like 30 hours per week, professional cyclist, if they push just a little bit too hard on their easy work, so if their heart rate is, 155 instead of 150 or whatever it is for them, that could be catastrophic in terms of the overall energy expenditure, that comes with doing 30 hours worth of work just a little bit too fast. But if you are more of a recreational athlete, a novice, if you're doing 3 to 4 hours, for example, and you push just a little bit past what that true physiological threshold is, it's probably going to be fine. You're probably not so close to your capacity or really walking that razor's edge like some elite athletes are, that you probably have a little bit more room to goof off or mess up, if you will. So do stick to the idea of doing a lot of easy training, even if you aren't doing a ton of hours. I do still think that easy work or zone 2 work is super valuable. But if you do go a little bit too fast and say you're in lower zone 3 instead of upper zone 2, it's not the end of the world, and it's not worth putting a ton of energy or stress into, like I find a lot of people do.
Why is it valuable? Just so the listeners understand, why is zone 2 valuable?
Yeah. So zone 2 serves a couple of purposes. Some of them can kind of overlap with zone 3. Some of them can't as much. So really any easy to moderate intensity cardio, so zone 2, zone 3 included, anything that you can sustain for a pretty long period of time is going to be great for just overall aerobic development. So sustaining a high level of cardiac output for long periods of time. So with that, you're improving your ability to burn fat for fuel, like aerobic beta oxidation. You're improving your ability to burn carbohydrate for fuel, aerobic glycolysis. So you're just kind of increasing your ability to burn through those energy substrates. You're improving overall cardiac output, which is going to be the main limiter determining your VO2 max for most people. And whether you're doing easy training or moderate training, anytime you're accruing a lot of training volume, you're going to be improving the generally wide spectrum of those kind of aerobic qualities. With zone 2 kind of lower intensity work in particular, it's going to be a little bit more glycogen sparing, we say, which basically means you're not burning through as many carbohydrate reserves, et cetera, which can make you feel better for subsequent high intensity work. So if you were to go on a 30-minute run, for example, and you're more in zone 3, you might have a harder time doing intervals or weightlifting the next day. Whereas if you keep it a little bit easier, do zone 2 work, make it more of a fat burning workout, so to speak. I hesitate to even say that because people misinterpret it. But if you do that, you are going to feel better in that following session just because you have more carbohydrate reserves left over. The recovery side is going to feel a little bit easier. So not only does zone 2 make it possible to accumulate large amounts of work, it makes subsequent high intensity work a little bit easier, just because your energy reserves are better, and also kind of regulate your vagal tone, so to speak, which is going to encourage you to get better kind of deeper rest and relaxation following zone 2 work as well.
How much do you like to program in typically?
Good question. I think a good minimum that I would say 99% of the population should strive for is 60 to 90 minutes per week. And you can divide that really however you want. I think if you're hitting that first as a priority just for overall health, supporting recovery, et cetera, then you're in a great place, probably doing better than most. And the sky's the limit from there. You can adapt to a huge amount of zone 2 work if you want. You take the time to build up to it. And I think most people, if they choose an appropriate modality, get on a bike or elliptical or rower or whatever it is they like, I think most people can get to that 60 to 90 minutes per week pretty quickly.
Amazing. And you recommend for the average person just go by the easy, medium, hard, or do you like tracking intensity via heart rate or different sort of wearables?
Yeah. Some of it depends on the person. I do know some people that they just kind of have that go hard all the time mentality. And I think for some people like that, having some sort of wearable in place just to kind of keep them in check and serve as a governor can be really helpful. I don't think everybody needs it. But there are certain people that just, they're out there for a run. They're just going to go nuts. They need something to kind of pull them back and keep them honest. So I do think there's value in some of those wearables. But I think if you are honest with yourself and don't feel like you have to set a PR every workout, I think most people can get great results just thinking about easy, medium, hard, and kind of thinking about what their breath is like.
Amazing. And how do you focus on your breath when you're doing your cardio? Do you worry about your way of breathing, like nose breathing, mouth breathing? How do you keep an eye on these things?
Good question.
Just have a check.
So there's a lot of good research on breathing during exercise and kind of what matters and what correlates with different other physiological parameters. And generally there's two kind of main takeaways. One is when it comes to like nose breathing versus mouth breathing, et cetera, just do what feels good and natural to you. There's no real advantage to forcing yourself to breathe a particular way, depending on the size of your nose, which has a huge genetic component, depending on the weather, kind of air temperature, the humidity, if you have allergies or sinus congestion. All those sorts of factors can influence whether you're going to be more comfortable breathing through your nose or your mouth at a given intensity. And there's no need to force it. If someone with huge nostrils, no allergies or congestion at all, that person, they may be able to breathe through their nose even at super, super high intensity. Whereas you might be someone with like a deviated septum, for example, or chronic sinusitis, and you just can't breathe through your nose at all. So there's no sense to kind of force a particular style as far as that's concerned. But we do see very, very strong correlations between respiratory rate or respiratory frequency and a wide range of physiological parameters. So if you plot someone's respiratory frequency, so how quickly they're breathing per minute or how many breaths they're getting per minute, if you plot that against blood lactate, for example, or you plot that against RPE, really, or heart rate, really any physiological parameter you can pick, respiratory rate correlates extremely, extremely well with all of those things. So a lot of these kind of bits of data that are a little bit harder to measure or require specialized equipment or a wearable, et cetera. If you are just monitoring nothing else but your respiratory frequency, you have a pretty good idea of where probably all of those parameters actually are with surprising accuracy. It doesn't feel very scientific, just kind of listening to your breath, because it's always on you. You don't need any fancy equipment, but it's actually remarkable how well it can kind of predict some of these other values. So if you can get into a kind of habit of being aware of your breath, being aware of your breath frequency, or at least your breathing rhythm kind of as it relates to your movement, your stride, your pedal stroke, whatever you're doing, it can give you a ton of data and be very valuable for you to kind of pay attention to or track loosely over time.
Amazing. And when it comes to the different modalities, you mentioned running, cycling, elliptical, etc. What are the different cardio benefits or adaptations for traditional cardio, like the ones that you mentioned, versus say circuits, resistance exercises grouped together like WODs? You referred earlier to the Murph that you did. What are the different benefits and adaptations on the two different approaches there?
Absolutely. So with this question, it really depends on your training level. So the more of a novice you are, the more overlap and kind of bleed over there's going to be between different exercise types. People always ask, is lifting cardio, are circuits cardio, et cetera. And I always kind of think about the fact that even cardio is actually kind of a hypertrophy and strength stimulus for the novice. We have a lot of studies that look at like people, untrained individuals who start a cycling program, just classic endurance training, and they end up adding leg strength and leg size. So on some level, if you are a novice enough or an untrained individual, any kind of physical activity, any sort of difficult training program is kind of a little bit of everything. And the better you get, the more specialized your training is going to need to become to continue to get some of those adaptations that you want. And strength training is no different. If you're a completely untrained individual and you start even a basic resistance training program, you're going to see some cardiovascular adaptation as well. You're going to see improvements to things like, fasting blood glucose and blood pressure, all these sorts of things that people generally associate with cardiovascular health. You can get a lot of these benefits from resistance training, which is great. The mistake, I think, is people look at some of that data and they go, see, strength training is all you need. Strength training is cardio. Who needs to run and that sort of thing? But I think what people lack is kind of a sense of scale of how far can you take some of those adaptations and what is the limit to what can strength training do for you cardiovascularly? And that applies to some of the blended approaches as well. So like Metcons, kettlebell circuits, et cetera. Yes, they are cardio to some degree, but how far can we really take it? In terms of VO2 max, kind of the measure of aerobic fitness overall that people like to reference, we do have some sense of understanding of, what is the highest VO2 max you could potentially get from training with certain modalities. And when it comes to resistance training, at least what I've seen in the literature is if your VO2 max for a young, healthy male, mind you, a young, healthy male, if your VO2 max is below 40, resistance training probably still has a lot to offer you in terms of improving your cardiovascular health and getting you up to a VO2 max in the low 40s, give or take. If you want a VO2 max higher than that, or if you already have a VO2 max higher than that, there's simply not a way or a mechanism for strength to get you much beyond that point. Which 40 is good. It's a good VO2 max, but in terms of improved cardiovascular health outcomes, reduced mortality, all those sorts of things, we really do want to be even above that. We want to get into the optimal or excellent range. So while resistance training can do a lot, it's not going to get us all the way. Same thing with kettlebell circuits and those sorts of things. When we start to blend them together, we definitely increase the metabolic stress. We definitely increase the cardiovascular component, but it's still not going to be as potent as true traditional cardio. What that means to you, how you interpret that really depends on your current fitness, your current goals, and your current preferences. So if you're someone who just wants to be generally healthy, you hate traditional cardio, and you just want to have a reasonably healthy VO2 max somewhere in the mid 40s, by all means, do resistance training, do some circuit training, do some Metcons, maybe go for a walk and you can be just fine. If you really want to optimize it, if you want optimal health, if you want to get your cardiovascular disease risk as low as you possibly can, the data suggests you just have to do some traditional cardio as well. The previous approach is not going to cut it if you want the best of the best, and certainly not if you have cardiovascular related performance goals.
What's your preferred cardiovascular mode of training for yourself?
For myself, I love, this isn't really answering your question, and I'm sorry, but I love the blend, because if I do only one thing, I just get kind of worn out and sick of that one thing. Like if I spend all my time on the bike, you get saddle sores and you're hunched over all day. And I'm like, I just want to get up and do something else. If I do nothing but running, there's only so much I can run before like my feet and stuff get a little bit achy. So I love mixing it up because it allows me to do more and have more fun and have a little bit easier recovery. But historically I'm a runner first and foremost. So that's probably my favorite. But I find the mix just makes it so much more tolerable to get in a lot and keep it feeling fun. And it feels like less work, I think, when it's mixed together like that.
Yeah. Here's a bit of a question that it's definitely it depends question, but here's one for you. If you get 100% of progress from just training, or you get 100% of progress from just running, kind of coming back to that elite thinking of running, what percentage do you think you could still achieve when you're aiming to progress both?
That's a good question. I think the percentage is probably pretty high. People have answered this question a variety of ways. Sometimes they'll look at, like what are the world records or world bests? What's the peak of human potential in some of these areas? And where are hybrid athletes in relation to some of these things? We've done that with CrossFitters, like, look at CrossFit athletes and how close are they to, Olympic weightlifters in the Olympics? How close are they to professional rowers on the erg and that sort of thing? And when we analyze it like that, we see that top CrossFitters are often around 80%, give or take, in terms of like true world-class strength. They're probably not nearly as close to that when it comes to some of the cardio parameters. But a lot of that is a function of body mass as well. Like we simply would not be able to expect a 200-pound athlete to be anywhere close to a 115-pound athlete when it comes to running a 5K sort of thing. But I think if we rephrase that and instead of comparing, what's possible for you or for me to the best of the best in the world, just what would be possible for us based on our genetic makeup, our muscle fiber type composition, et cetera. So if we're like, all right, Akash, what's the best that you could be at running if you were just a runner? And what's the best you could be at lifting if you were just a lifter? How close can we get you to, your potential personal best? I think the percentage is probably a lot higher. I wouldn't expect me or you or whatever to have the potential to be the best strength athlete in the world, or have the potential to be the best endurance athlete in the world. A lot of, average everyday people probably have genetics that put them more in kind of the hybrid athlete category. Because when we look at professional runners and professional lifters, we're looking at, kind of the genetic elite that are self-selected to have the best genetics for that particular sport. And we couldn't expect an average person to come anywhere close to those kind of very specialized genetics required to do that. So I think most people are probably better suited to be hybrid athletes than to be specialist athletes, because it's just kind of the average. You're not destined to be this or destined to be this. You're somewhere in the middle. So I think if we tackle the question that way, I think that most people could come within 80% of their kind of peak genetic potential at a wide variety of things, kind of all simultaneously, which really is pretty good if you think about it.
Mm. And out of interest, why, if you have the 5 blocks a week, why 2 weights, 3 cardio versus say 3 weights, 2 cardio, which is probably the more typical approach?
Yeah. I would probably bias the cardio a little bit more, just because cardio is a little bit more dependent on getting in training volume, whereas you can get a lot in kind of more bang for your buck when it comes to weightlifting intensity. If you are pushing really hard and that sort of thing, if you're hitting all your muscle groups twice a week, I think you can get the majority of your results. Whereas with the cardio side of things, there's kind of no substitute for getting some volume in. That being said, I might tweak my answer a little bit, depending on the person. Some people are naturally better at one thing than another, or someone might have, say, a family history of heart disease, for example. So if I was talking with an individual who they had, metabolic disease in their family, that sort of thing, they struggle with their weight, those sorts of things a little bit more, I would probably bias the cardio side a little bit more for that type of person. Whereas other people, they might have a active manual labor job. They might be on their feet all day. They might get 10,000 steps a day already. For that person, I might take a more minimalistic approach to cardio and get them in the gym a little bit more, lifting some weights. So it does kind of depend on the person, their background, their activity level outside of the gym, and those factors too.
And what do you see are the biggest mistakes people make when they're balancing the two of weights and cardio?
That's a great question. Oh man, there's so many mistakes, but also I think people aren't patient. That's probably the biggest one for me. People aren't patient. They try to do it all, and it's hard. It's hard to do it all. And then they give up, or they're like, no, I tried to add cardio onto my lifting program, and it didn't work. I'm like, well, how long did you try? And they're like, 2 weeks. It's like, well, of course it didn't work in 2 weeks. Like, it's a lifelong pursuit. If you add cardio onto a strength training program, you're probably going to feel worse before you feel better. You're going to feel the interference effect, so to speak, at first. You're going to be fatigued. You're going to be a little bit more sore. And these sorts of things take a long time to adapt to. So my biggest piece of advice for people is, if you're adding strength onto a running program, for example, or you're adding cardio onto a lifting program, is don't be too aggressive out of the gate. No one failed the hybrid game by starting too easy, and then just give it time. So don't be too aggressive, be patient, give it time, run with the program that you set for yourself for at least 12 weeks before you make any major decisions. Like, see how you adapt. I think too many people get tired or run down 2-3 weeks in, and they make these big changes or think it doesn't work for them. But you got to be more patient than that. And I think if you just stick with it, you'll be surprised at what you can adapt to and progress from, even if on paper you don't do it the optimal way. So I said people make a lot of mistakes, in terms of like how you schedule a workout, how you arrange your sessions, how you approach strength training, etc. Even if you make all the mistakes, make all the mistakes and just stick with it for a couple of months, I think you'll be surprised at how well it still works despite the mistakes if you just give it that kind of time.
Yeah, I've started, I spent most of my training years bodybuilding. So for over 10 years, my only focus was bodybuilding, and cardio would only enter the mix if I was dieting down. And I was using it very functionally. And then about the start of last year, I lost interest in bodybuilding. I felt like I didn't want to do what it took to get to the next level. I wanted to look for something new. So I started Muay Thai around November time. And then with that, I started running as well, because apparently they come hand in hand. So for this whole year, I've been trying to balance weight training with Muay Thai and running. And the biggest problem I've had is continuously either overdoing it, getting too excited and doubling my running volume, or just programming too much intensity. I'm still struggling to find that sweet spot of recovery and training effect. So I could definitely relate to the idea of just jumping out the gates too quick, because you're balancing so many different modalities when you've got other responsibilities. Like now this year I've also had a newborn, so my sleep hasn't been as good, etc. So I found that to be really tough when starting this, and I'm assuming it's something that you continue to refine over the years. And I saw you do a really good post on a couple of weeks ago on how you've helped like 100-mile people that are training for a 100-mile race only run 30 miles a week, but you've had people doing a 5K train something like 100 miles a week or whatever it was. And the idea is that everyone has a different recovery potential or capacity. How do you find your sweet spot with that and address the recovery demands? Because I'm assuming that that's the real thing to really crack once you get more advanced into this game.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest mistakes, to kind of piggyback on your earlier question too, is people just have this kind of preconceived notion or understanding of what an effective training program looks like for a certain goal, without paying any attention to like who they are or where they are at in terms of their fitness, their total stress, their stress outside of the gym and training, etc. And they're just like, oh, this marathon plan says to run 50 miles a week, so I'm going to run 50 miles a week. But it doesn't take into account like how much are you running right now, and what is your anthropometric structure, like how are you going to handle that sort of mileage and all these sorts of factors. So I think especially with the hybrid or kind of concurrent training programs, people will just assume that they should be following this hypertrophy program and following this marathon program, and then just stack them together and assume it's going to work. Those programs certainly don't account for the fact that you have an entire other training program you're trying to balance too. So I think people have to be really careful about making assumptions about what their training should look like. A good concurrent training program, especially when you're starting off, is probably not even going to look like a beginner's training program for either of those individual sports. So if you're a hybrid athlete training for a marathon for the first time, you might not even be able to do a classic beginner marathon program at first. Doesn't mean you won't be able to ever, but you're probably going to have to start below that and gradually work your way up. If you do, you might be surprised at how much you can work up, long term. But it never hurts to start, too easy or too low and then see how you respond. If you take that kind of approach of be patient, know that you don't have to get it all figured out this week. I think that's really the key to figuring out what you can handle and what volume is going to be appropriate for you. Because if you start too hard, all you know is that you don't feel good and that you don't think it's working. But it's hard to figure out what's wrong or what to do. But if you start on the lower end and you do feel good and you do see some results, it's very easy to kind of build on that momentum over time. So I'd encourage people when you're starting out, do less than you think you need to do. Try to get as much benefit, as much bang for your buck as you can out of the smaller amount of training that you are doing, and then just continue to add on to that if recovery is good and the progress is good.
How do you gauge someone's ability to handle intensity? What markers are you looking at? What signs are you looking at someone who's potentially got more room to push versus someone who can, no matter what you do, you have that 100-mile racer who can only do 30 miles a week? What are some of the markers you're looking at?
A variety of things depending on kind of what aspect of recovery we're looking at. Like some of it's going to be more orthopedic or structural, with like running bridles, for example, with just like, how your joints feel after a run. Do you have any injuries, things of that nature? Whereas some of it's going to be more, kind of energetic, so to speak. And a lot of that's driven by overall aerobic capacity. So whether we're talking about someone's ability to do repeated high intensity intervals or ability to handle a long workout, it's kind of going to be driven by the same thing, which is just their overall aerobic capacity. But a good way to measure that in the context of high intensity work is to look at someone's kind of ability to repeat an effort. So if we know what someone's time trial performance is, or like what's the best you can do on a bike for a 1-minute sprint, if we take a percentage of that, like say 90% of max, how many times can you repeat that in a workout before the performance suffers? And we'll see some athletes, like traditional strength and power athletes, people that are not very well developed aerobically, they might do 3 1-minute intervals at 90% and they're just gas and the performance tanks from there. Whereas like an aerobic powerhouse athlete, they might do 10 of those repeats before their performance tanks. And what I think is important for people to understand, especially with high intensity work, is you need the quality to be high to get the desired adaptation. So if you are kind of that anaerobic strength and power athlete, you might only be able to do 3 intervals at a high enough quality for them to be worth your time and worth your energy and worth your recovery cost. Whereas that aerobic powerhouse athlete, they might be able to sustain that quality for much, much longer. They might be able to do 10 of those repeats in a workout and recover from it. So the ability to sustain high training quality is huge, and your ability to recover from stress and your ability to kind of deliver stress go hand in hand. So that athlete that's able to give you 10 quality repeats, they're more likely to be able to recover from that, those 10 repeats, because they have the ability to deliver. Just like the anaerobic athlete, they might have a few good repeats in them, but then the performance tanks, that's also reflective of their capacity to recover from that same stress.
So do you think this is do you think someone's ability to handle high intensity can change, or do you think some people have certain, not limits is probably the wrong word, but certain constraints where there'll never be someone who can do, say, 4 high intensity sessions a week? It's usually too hard, too medium, too easy, as an example.
Yeah. I think it has less to do with the frequency, like 2 times a week or 3 times a week or whatever, and more just with the accrued total volume, depending on how you distribute it. But certainly there's, kind of your aerobic slow twitch athletes, so to speak, that are never going to be as fast and powerful and explosive, but they're just kind of have that innate ability to recover and endure. And likewise, you have some of those faster twitch athletes, get a little bit more springy, powerful, etc. Their innate endurance is never going to be quite as good. So you're always going to see athletes with kind of different performance profiles. That doesn't mean they can't be successful at given events, even at, looking at someone running a 10K, for example. You have an athlete who's running a really fast 10K. They might come at it from kind of that slow twitch endurance angle, they might take a more endurance biased training approach. They might have higher volume. They might do more repeats of a given high intensity interval workout compared to that same athlete or a similar athlete might come at the same event, same performance in that event, but they might be coming at it from a totally different angle. They might have lower training volume. They might have higher overall training intensity, but just less volume. And kind of different approaches are going to work for different athletes, depending on, again, what that performance profile is. A lot of hybrid athletes that I work with, I think kind of fit the strength athlete profile a little bit more. That's where they started, that's where they've excelled. And now, thanks to the kind of popularity of concurrent training, you see more of these strength athletes want to add a cardio component. And most of these athletes are probably going to want to approach this kind of goal from that fast twitch, speed and power angle, as opposed to what a lot of endurance athletes do, which is coming up from the other side. So I think even though you might be training for the same goal, if you're a concurrent athlete training for a 10K road race, your training program on the endurance side might look much different than, an endurance junkie who's training for a 10K. And that doesn't mean that you're not as fit or that you can't do as well, or that you're never going to be able to perform at that level. It just means your makeup physiologically and how you respond to some of these training inputs is going to be a little bit different. And that's okay. You might actually excel and do really well on a very different kind of seemingly minimalistic program compared to someone else. You might have a little bit more intensity. You might be able to really bring the heat on some high intensity intervals, even better than the aerobic endurance athlete. But it might very much be a case of quality over quantity for you.
Amazing. Where do you sit on that spectrum? Because you started as an endurance athlete, but you seem to be doing a lot more strength stuff now.
Yeah. It is funny because a lot of people don't even know that I'm an endurance athlete as much as I am, because I just think the strength stuff is more fun to post about and make content and education and that sort of thing. But I would definitely consider myself very much slow twitch endurance athlete. And I say that just because I ran my first 50-mile ultra when I was fairly untrained. I was 16 years old, just went out and ran a 50-miler, and I was fine. I think I got 22nd place in a field of a few hundred, which is not amazing, but at 16 years old, just kind of going out for fun, no injuries, ran the whole thing, etc. So that's always come very naturally to me. The downside to that, I think, is I never probably trained to my full potential because it did come so easily. I never trained as hard as I probably could have or should have on that side of things. I always did the bare minimum and then really focused on the strength, which doesn't come as naturally. I work probably 5 times as hard at the strength training side of things for the results that I have. And I just put in a little bit of effort on the endurance side and still am quite good at it. So I'm kind of not playing to my strengths as far as that goes. It would probably be smarter for me to just go all in on endurance and leave strength behind. But I love it too much.
It's interesting for someone who does a 180 kilo reverse lunge to say strength doesn't come easy to them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think most people don't see, they see my performance. And I think in terms of how impressive it is or whatever, I'm probably fairly well balanced, so to speak. I think my strength and endurance performances are similarly impressive. But for anyone listening or watching, just know that strength, I put significantly more time and energy into that side of it to have that level of performance. Whereas the endurance, I'm sometimes embarrassed to admit how I don't work nearly as hard as I could or should, and I could probably be much better.
Well, speaking of doing single leg feats that you mentioned, and even just some of these cardio sessions, what's your approach to warming up? How do you approach warming up for your training and then your cardio as well? Yeah,
I definitely take a very minimalistic approach to warming up. I'm not a big fan of very, kind of long and drawn out specific warm ups with a bunch of different movements, before your session has even really gotten started. So generally I'm kind of on the side of just do lighter sets of your main movement for the day. That being said, I think how you arrange a training session can make a big difference in just how it goes, the quality of each lift that you get to. And so I find that if I do certain exercises to start the session, if I start my workout with some of my plyometric training or some of my core training, things that get the hips and rib cage moving a little bit or the spine moving a little bit, I find that kind of offers a built-in warm-up, so to speak, for some of the heavier training, like the heavy lunges and squats and deadlifts and stuff that comes later in the session. And I find it simply just more effective for me. So instead of having to go through this like 20 to 30 minute, warm up routine, and then I start my deadlifts, and then, at the end of the session, I'm coming back for some core work and to do my calf training accessories and plyos and whatever. I find if I just kind of flip the session on its head, rearrange things a little bit, I can jump right into, some core training, calf training, plyos, whatever. I can jump right into that at a pretty high intensity, do a couple of rounds of that. And then, I'm warmed up now too, go through a couple lighter sets of deadlifts. Now we're cooking. So I don't dislike warm-ups. I just think that if you arrange your sessions a little bit more intelligently, and focus on, am I actually getting a good training stimulus out of this thing that I'm doing, or am I just getting ready to train? I think if you focus on always getting as much of a stimulus as you can, your need for a true warm-up will significantly drop, if that makes sense.
And does that apply for cardio as well?
For cardio, it kind of depends on the intensity of the workout and the person too. Like for sprint work, I highly recommend getting warm, gradually ramping up into some of the higher intensity work. For like zone 2, zone 3, I just kind of go. Like right now I have a tempo run. Every Wednesday I do a tempo run, and I don't warm up for that at all. I just get on and start going. I feel a little stiff the first mile, but it's fine. So again, I think people warm up probably a little bit too much. If you want to warm up for running, just run, maybe start a little bit slower. But the higher intensity of the session, if you are doing like 100-meter repeats, that's going to take you a lot more time to kind of get your body ready for that. But still running slower sprints, gradually work up to that intensity, and you'll be fine.
Just for context, what are tempo runs?
Oh yeah. So tempo run is kind of that moderate intensity that we talked about. So not easy, not hard, but that kind of in between. And that's something that, my tempo run, for example, I'm doing 6 miles at approximately half marathon race pace. So that's kind of my version of my Wednesday tempo run at the moment. And even that half marathon race pace, maybe a little slower. I just jump right into.
And so you do one fast, one tempo, one slow, basically.
Let's see. So right now, more or less, I have an interval workout. Although my interval workout is kind of blended with some distance. It's kind of a longer workout as well, longer than most people's interval workout. And then I have a tempo run, and then I have a long run, and then I do a fair amount of cross training as well. So my current cardio program, if you want the whole thing, is I have an interval workout. I'm doing kind of a high volume of 800-meter repeats plus some additional distance. So that workout ends up being 10 to 12 miles overall of 800-meter repeats. I have a long trail run that I do with my wife on the weekend, and I throw on a weight vest that allows me to get my heart rate up a little bit while running at a slower pace with her and still get a good stimulus from it. And that's usually about 10 miles with her. And that weight vest helps me get my heart rate up to at least zone 2. So kind of that easy but effective training stimulus. I have a tempo run, so that's that moderate effort. So 6 miles at half marathon pace, give or take. So that's my easy, medium, and hard training. And then sometimes I'll do another easy run on top of that. But I'm usually doing about 45 minutes to an hour of stairs 2 or 3 days a week as well. Plus some bicycle commuting on top of that.
Stair, you mean the Stairmaster?
Yeah.
Brutal.
Yeah.
Amazing. So you're doing quite a fair bit of cardio then. But then you work in the gym as well, right?
I do. I don't work that much in person at this stage. But I am on my feet 15 to 20 hours a week in the gym as well.
Yeah. And one of the reasons why we connected was through a mutual friend who's also vegan, and I know you're a vegan athlete.
Yeah.
How is being plant-based, or what's your reason for being plant-based and vegan, and how have you found being vegan and performing at such elite levels? What factors have you had to consider?
Yeah. So I've now been plant-based for 16 years. So I started when I was like 14 years old. So it's been quite a while. My reasons for it have kind of gradually evolved over time. But I'd say at this stage, it's purely kind of ethical and environmental. The pushback I get from that is people like to point out kind of hypocrisies or other ways in which, maybe I'm not 100% ethical, or not everything that I do is environmentally friendly. Like traveling, for example, long distances. But I think there's always going to be some level of hypocrisy in any kind of decision that you make. And I just kind of take the stance of doing the best I can and trying to reduce harm wherever I can. I may not be able to do it in every area. I may not be perfect, but I see if I take a certain approach to my diet, that's one very simple way that I can at least do some good in this world, even if I'm not perfect in every other area. So that's my primary motivation for it, is just doing what's right for the planet, for the animals, etc. But I really enjoy it from a health perspective as well. I don't think you have to eat the way that I do, but I think there are some major advantages to it. And we do generally see that the healthiest diets in the world are mostly plant-based. Again, you don't have to go as extreme or as strict as I have or as you have. But I do find a lot of people, just by moving in that general direction, can see some really positive health outcomes from it. From a training perspective, the biggest question I always get is, where do you do protein and that sort of thing? Or aren't you worried about omega-3 or zinc or whatever? And at this point, I've been doing it so long, those things don't even cross my mind. I think if you make the transition, when you make a switch, it's really hard to kind of figure some of these things out, get a diet in place that works for you. But past that initial kind of transitional period, once you get into a rhythm with it, it's just like, another day in a life sort of thing. So I don't really think about that kind of stuff. I have a, kind of approach that works for me. And I don't really have to think about it. I don't have to work at it. It's just kind of routine for me at this point.
Yeah, I think your track record speaks for itself. If it hindered you, you would have known by now.
Yeah, exactly.
So what's next for you, Alec, on the horizon? Have you got any challenges planned? What are you working on outside of the knee crusher?
Yeah, I got my knee crusher classic going on. If you're interested in that, I got a 1 rep max reverse lunge competition going on my Instagram right now.
Why the reverse lunge 1 rep max? What made you choose that?
So this is the second competition I posted. The first one a few months back was the side bend 1 rep max. And I think I personally have gotten bored with some of the squat, bench, deadlift, the Olympic weightlifting. There's kind of the classic 1 rep maxes that you see tested in competition. And we train a wide variety of movements. Like I guess some powerlifters just squat, bench, deadlift. But you train other movements, you train accessories, you do some machine work, you do some single leg work. And I always thought it would be interesting just to see, what can some of these athletes do on some other movements, especially some of my favorite movements, some things that I think are important in training or that I've gotten a lot of joy from in training. So I figured, why not just host a competition for it? The other reason for the competition is has to do with the Anti-Fragile Lifting Club, kind of this idea of movement optimism. I think a lot of people are unnecessarily fearful of certain exercises, certain categories of exercises. They think certain things are inherently risky. They worry about wear and tear, that sort of thing. So they worry about rounding their back on a deadlift. They worry about, the orthopedic cost of having a heavy barbell on your back for squats. So they think single leg work is safer, for example. People will say just do side planks and core stability exercises. Side bends are bad for your back. And so much of this this kind of messaging is not really evidence-based in the first place. There's a lot of kind of unnecessary fear mongering that goes on, a lot of post hoc kind of fallacies of people get injured and then people come up with these wacky ideas of why and try to blame it on how they were moving, even though it probably didn't have a lot to do with it. So I started the Anti-Fragile Lifting Club to kind of challenge some of these beliefs. And these competitions that I host are designed to kind of challenge people's biases and understanding of what these lifts can do, their safety profile, and what's possible with them. So the side bend challenge really challenged the idea that side bends are dangerous. Got people doing some insanely heavy side bends. People are doing side bends with like 250 pounds. No one's back exploded, which was cool to see. And then with the knee crusher, I found that a lot of single leg exercises, people assume that they are safer than like back squats or deadlifts. But I think a big problem is that people just underload them chronically. Like people don't work hard enough when it comes to single leg deadlifts lunges, split squats. They kind of like half-ass them. They'll go RPE 10 on their deadlifts and RPE 5 on their split squats and lunges. And so I wanted to encourage people not to come at these exercises from a safety perspective, but let's see how dangerous we can make it. Let's see what you can do with it. Not that I want people to get hurt, it's not the take home message, but I want to show people that even a reverse lunge, it's not a light accessory exercise. It's a lift that can be just as impactful, just as important, just as heavy, et cetera, as some of these other things. So we've seen a couple guys already lunging over 400 pounds in the competition so far with a couple weeks to go. So
Wow.
it's really cool to see what people are capable of.
It's impressive. So you're saying, sorry, I interrupted you about your challenges that you got coming up. So you got the knee crusher going on now. What are you personally working on in the next 12 to 18 months?
Yeah. So for me personally, I have some ideas, some hybrid challenges I kind of have set for myself in my head, some things I want to accomplish. Most of it revolves around me kind of getting my cardio and my running kind of back in shape. From my perspective, I've never been out of shape, I guess you would say, but I think my cardio has kind of slipped a little bit. I'm not as strong of a runner right now as I used to be. And so a lot of my goals for myself for 2024 are kind of centered around getting my running back to a place I'm really happy with and doing some kind of hybrid challenges with that. So things like I want to bench 3 plates and run a sub-3 marathon in the same day sometime next year. I want to do a 500-pound squat and sub 5-minute mile on the same day sometime the next year. And most of these are things I'm very, very close to already. So I think it's realistic within a year's time frame. But we'll see. I don't want to throw out numbers that I can't do yet. I just kind of want to do it when it happens and talk about it then,
Yeah, for sure. Sounds amazing. How can people find out more about some of the work you're doing, Alec?
Yeah, follow me on Instagram. My name at Alec Blenis. My favorite thing that I do on social media is my weekly Q&As. So I talk about a lot of these concepts that we've talked about today. I talk about concurrent training, answering any questions that you guys have about it, giving as much kind of free training advice as I can. I also have some training programs to follow on there as well. But keep an eye out for my weekly Q&As. They're a lot of fun. They've gotten more and more popular. I can't get to every question, but I do try to answer 20 to 30 questions a week. So check me out, ask some questions, and I look forward to hearing from you. Amazing.
Thanks so much for coming on the podcast, Alec. I think there's a lot of value people can apply to their own hybrid journey.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, Akash. It was great.